Welcome. I am Michele Leclaire, Executive Director of Buckham Gallery. Today, I am chatting with Jillian Dickson, Michael Reedy, and Brian Spolans. Their exhibition, Small Talk, is on view through February 12th. And I have to say, I am so excited to share this work with you. These artists offer investigations of other people as externalizations of experience and internal fears. These neuroses are present with tenderness, reverence, and the distance experienced with others. And it is so good. Additionally, this work can be seen in Buckham Gallery through February 12th, 2022, and on our website at buckhamgallery.org. Before we join the conversation, I would like to say thank you to our incredible audience, whether visiting the gallery in person or viewing these videos online, and to all the artists who submit to our exhibition calls. I appreciate you. Next, I would like to say a big thank you to all the individuals and organizations who support Buckham Fine Arts Project and Gallery, including the Charles Stewart Mott Foundation, Michigan Council for Arts and Cultural Affairs, and the National Endowment for the Arts, Greater Flint Arts Council, Share Art, Genesee Grant Program, made possible by the Genesee County Arts, Education, and Cultural Enrichment Millage funds. Your tax dollars at work. Thank you. Thank you again for joining us for this in conversation. As I said, we are really excited to present this work, Small Talk. It's a group exhibition featuring Jillian Dickson, Michael Reedy, Brian Spolans. Their work is incredible. Jillian Dickson is an assistant professor of art and design at Alma College, Alma, Michigan. Jillian received her BFA from Bradley University in 2005 and her MFA from Clemson University in 2007. She is an internationally exhibited artist. In the summer of 2015, Jillian participated in the Art Venice project, which is a digital presentation of her work alongside other international artists, taking place the first week of the 56th Venice Biennale. In 2012, Jillian represented La Galerie Particulière in the Drawing Now exhibition held at the Louvre in Paris. Her work has been exhibited throughout the United States, including Swarm Gallery in Oakland, California, Think Space Gallery in Culver City, California, Antler Gallery in Portland, Oregon, and the Urban Institute of Contemporary Art in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Jillian's art has been included in publications such as International Drawing Annual, High Fructose, and Juxtapose. And it's really incredible. Jillian's going to talk about the assemblages of familiar people. You know, the works make visible the intimate connections between people and their independence from them. We also today are talking to Michael Reedy. He currently lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan, and teaches drawing at Eastern State University's School of Art and Design. His work has been included in over 200 national and international exhibitions and can be viewed in numerous private and institutional collections, including Clatsop Community College, Pennsylvania College of Technology, Minot State University, Shippensburg University, and the Hoffman Trust National Collection in association with San Diego Art Institute. His work has been featured in over 30 books and journals, including High Fructose, Juxtapose, Spectrum, and Fresh Paint. Notable recent creative activities include a two-person exhibition at 111 Mina Gallery in San Francisco, and solo exhibitions at Heliacon Gallery in Denver, the Scarab Club in Detroit, Arch Enemy Arts in Philadelphia, and Ben Art Gallery in Brunswick, Australia. His work was also recently featured in Create Magazine, Creative Quarterly, The Moleskin Project Volume 2, Spoke Art, and Manifest Gallery's 14th International Drawing Annual. And finally, today we'll be talking with Brian Spolans. Spolans is an artist and instructor based in Southeast Michigan. His work has been exhibited at 500X Gallery in Dallas, Paragon Gallery in Philadelphia, Muskegon Museum of Art, International Print Center of New York, and published in New American Paintings, Fresh Paint, and Create Magazine. He has co-curated the exhibition Post-Apocalypse at Gallery Project in Ann Arbor and Non-Text at Eastern Michigan University, where he teaches printmaking.
So welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I am so excited to actually finally, I've been sitting here with your work for a couple of weeks now, and to finally hear you talk about it. I'm really excited to learn more about your work and then sharing it with our community, of course. So I just want to say that this is a stunning show. I love the play that you all have, between Jillian's work where you're contemplating the process and the materials and the hidden imagery and the layers of pattern. And then we have, Brian's work, which is sort of psychological or conceptual and looking for meaning or the story behind the images. And then you have Michael, Michael's work, which is this technical skill that you're contemplating with sort of these unexpected materials and the conceptual intrigue. So, I mean, it's like you're all sort of tiptoeing on that line, or even skipping, the line between, this playful and macabre and the bizarre. So I'm just really excited to learn more about it. So, I like to start these conversations with a little background information. I would love to hear a little bit about where you're from and sort of what brought you to the art path. Jillian, would you like to go first?
Sure. So hi, I'm Jillian Dixon, and I have hailed from a small town, downtownless town called Darien in Illinois. It's right by Chicago. I grew up with parents that were in the medical field. And how did I come to art? I don't know. It seemed to be a very divergent path from what was set in front of me. But what I do know is that it was a natural extension of how my brain worked and how I processed the world around me, is to kind of see it through this application of making. So instead of talking about things, I tend to find a way of processing through making. And that just feels supernatural to me. And that's, that can be through drawing or painting, but also cooking, or just a physical engagement with the world seems to be, it seems to be part of my natural DNA. And so, yeah, drawing is a natural extension of who kind of I am and what I'm gravitated to spending time doing.
Yeah, oh, that's awesome. Thank you. Michael?
Yeah. I just sort of always drew. I just have memories of always drawing. And my parents, I would like to believe, were just supportive of that idea, because they stuck me in community art center classes and painting and all of that when I was quite young. Part of me looking back on it maybe suspects that was just an easy opportunity to get rid of me, it's the weekend and there's Michael. Let's put him in a bowling league. Let's drop him off at the community center to play mahjong with old people and learn how to paint. So it was just something that I guess I've always done. And then I moved around a lot as a child. I don't think I was in one place for more than 4 or 5 years at most, sometimes even shorter. So having hobbies and sort of drawing and doing things like that just seemed to be something that I carried with me when I went to places. So, and my brother, he sort of gravitated towards the music end of it all. So he sort of becoming really invested in music. Interestingly, neither of my parents would consider themselves artistic or make art. And no one in my immediate extended family does either. So I'm sort of this anomaly that no one quite understands. Wow. So they are always like, oh, what nice paintings you made, like that's how they cope with me. It's like, oh, I haven't seen you since last Christmas. What's been going on? And then they're like, oh, and your paintings. So that's my entire life from birth to now, in a nutshell. So
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing. Yeah, and Brian, what about you?
Well, I grew up in South Texas, near like a brief bike ride away from the beach, and I wasn't really an outside person. So I think a bit like Michael, drawing and having little things to doodle on and draw with was a great sort of babysitting tool, so that my mom could go around and chat and I could sit quietly and be busy myself while we were driving around and hanging out with her friends and things like that. I guess that continuing on, I was lucky enough to go to a fine arts high school in Alabama, which sounds like a bit of a oxymoron, but it was a wonderful experience, right? Where I lived on the third floor and I'd wake up 5 minutes before my classes and walk down and paint and draw and whatever for 3 hours a day, and be surrounded by all of these other like creative and amazing teenagers that are all excited about and passionate about like dance, music, art, along with math and science, which I guess they were passionate about as well. And then I guess I think that just continued on into my adulthood, that combination of the sort of extroversion of my mother, like taking me around so that she can like hang out, and that introversion of like, all right, I'm going to spend time by myself working on something, seems to describe a bit of the printmaker's ethos of like, oh, you know, I want to hang out and be around people, and I also want to be alone and make something. So I think that seems like a pretty good description of it.
Yeah, what an amazing experience for high school.
I loved
really,
it. It was
really
great.
great.
It was wonderful.
Yeah, and
I find it interesting that we all referenced our parents as some significant component of how we started, even in, you know, because I want to tag on to what Michael and Brian said, is that I just always have drawn. But something that I took from is that my parents would like hang it on the wall, like they were pumped about it. And so I think that that encouragement was so deeply meaningful for me to continue on. Yeah, I think parents make a probably in some way positively or negatively impact why it is that we draw or paint. Sorry to tag on to you guys. That's because I went first. I
love that, Jillian.
That's perfect.
I love that, Jillian, but I think like my parents were more excited. They thought that my fine motor skills that I was building was going to go towards being a doctor. So they were pretty, I mean, they were fine with me being an artist, you know, like it was too late for them to change anything by the time it happened, you know. But I think like whenever I was a kid, they had a lot of like hopes that this was going someplace maybe a bit more exciting, you know.
Well, you guys are glamorous. My parents, it was more like, okay, well, he can't seem to write or read. he's sort of dull. But look, he can draw Garfield. You know, I think but anyway, I digress.
Oh my gosh, that's great. I love all those stories. Yeah. Yeah, oh, that's wonderful. Okay, so I'm going to share the screen again and bring up another installation of you, because Brian, so you submitted the proposal to Buckham Gallery for Small Talk. How did you put together this proposal, or bring the three of you together?
Well, thanks for that, and thanks too for hosting. We're so excited to be a part of this exhibition and to like be showing it's such an amazing space as Buckham. I've been a big fan of Jillian and Michael's work for a really long time, and I was excited with the prospects of putting it together. When I've seen your space and been there, you've had such amazing shows, and I thought like I was excited with possibly being able to participate with that. And a way that I saw to do that would be with asking two people that I have been really impressed by, and that's Jillian and Michael. When I was putting together the proposal and thinking about how our work would go together, I see us as artists that are trying to understand the world through our work, trying to get a better understanding of other people and ourselves and what's going on through our work. And a lot of times we do that through the vehicle of people, or of objects that represent people. So in that way, I saw this as an exhibition about trying to understand the world around us via like what we have at hand. And with it being people there, it just seems like the next step to think about that is how is it that Michael sees the world and Jillian see the world. And I think something that connected us all was our playfulness and our sense of humor, along with, I think, a sense of like, I think that we have different moods that go along with it as well, which I thought was sort of exciting to see them next to each other.
Yeah, they really, it's interesting as we were first unpacking the work and bringing it out to do the layout, I was noticing, one, all the differences in the different bodies of work. And I was like, gosh, I was imagining the layout with everyone working together, but I started to like second guess my plan. But fortunately, moving things around, it really does. You all works go so well together. They're different, but there is a common thread. Whether with representation or color or just the mood. So it was really, I'm so glad you did it. Sent a proposal. Let me see. So specifically, the title chosen for this show is Small Talk. You did mention a little bit about sort of the way you relate and with people. Can you expound on that idea a little bit about why you chose the title?
I think there's a bit of irony with it. And I think to some extent that when people talk about small talk, it seems to be in a dismissive way, that this is kind of the obnoxious sort of steps that we need to go through in order to like have a human interaction. But I also think that that's somewhat of what we're going through when we're making our artwork, is that we're having these small sort of interactions and curiosities and questions that maybe aren't as meaningful or whatever, but that we're using that as a vehicle to try and understand other people. So I think in a way that I think there are really big things that we're talking about. Jillian's talking about family. I think I have big things that are talking about society, and Michael's talking about large concepts of life and death and love and all of these concepts, and they're really big. But how is it that we try and talk about them? And how do you begin to talk about them? Well, I mean, you got to say hi and how's the weather first, to some extent. So Small Talk to me seemed like, I don't know, an appropriate and fun title.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so Jillian, I have some questions for you. Of course, been, like I said, so excited to talk to you. In your statement, you sort of described your work as assemblages of familiar people. Can you tell me more about this assemblages of familiar people?
So I think my work is rooted in female subjectivity, and I don't know if that is intentional, but it's something that seems to be a default setting to me, is I'm seeing the world around me through the process of being a female, and that lens seems to be a pretty specific one. And so as a wife and a mother, excuse me, I'm viewing the piece that you have on the backdrop right now, is as a wife and a mother, I see these two individuals that I am deeply in love with, and how they have this interconnection, and also that they're very separate as people. And there's something so curious and wonderful about that enmeshment, but also the detachment of that. And so how I am sort of understanding my daughter as she's growing up, and her relationship with me and her relationship with my husband and her dad, is it feels deeply sacred to me, and also casual. Like this is what we do as humans. We like are so deeply in love with each other, and then we see them grow up as children, and then they separate from us, and sort of having this retroactive love for my own parents and seeing how much they cared for me and how that natural separation for me to grow my own family. I feel like I needed to press pause and just acknowledge this moment in my life of this balancing equation of what's now, but what's yet to come. And there's another piece in the show of my mom, me, and my daughter, and how when my daughter was born, I instantly, so this one, I had this image in my head of, oh, this is a painting I have to make at some point, to sort of reconcile. So it's titled Here, Now, Then, and There. And I know I'm going to have this piece for a long time. And my mom is, in her 70s. And I imagine at one point my daughter will own this piece, and thinking like, if I were to create this piece, and I'm right now in this sweet spot of my mom is still alive and well, my daughter is totally in love with me. And it's like, I just wanted to acknowledge this moment, is that and it sounds really cheesy, but like this is the good old times, or whatever that, that phrase is. I just needed to press pause in this like interconnection between us women and, or us females. And so, yeah, I now forget the question that you asked, but I think, what I'm looking at is those relationships that are basic relationships, and how they grow and where they started from, and like how, like these moments that are so deeply meaningful to me, and that I highly identify with as a mom, as a sister, as a wife, and just sort of studying them and finding, and processing my own life right now. Like, what is this right now versus missing this moment? And I tend to process my life through making.
Yeah, you said something that really struck me, and I think it was beautiful, like trying to capture that, how our children are so much, in one hand, a part of us, because we're imagining, we see characteristics, whether, physical or personality. We're like, oh, that's like me, or that's like, dad, or whatever. And then they're also these completely separate beings with their own big personalities. And like you were capturing that. It was in the former slide, but, and then in this one where it is that happy, sweet spot where your daughter is still at an age where she's not probably fighting back too much yet.
Yeah.
And when she comes back around, which, we all do, we have, that breaking of the apron strings. And when we come back around, our mothers may not be there. So those were, two takeaways. That was just really beautiful to hear you talk about the work. Thank you.
I was also really interested in the reclining nude, or the reclining female. So if I'm going to be, I'm sorry, my phone is ringing. Shh, you. If I'm going to participate in this like art historical lineage of a reclining nude or a reclining female, like how is it that I want to participate in this lineage? And so I felt like if I'm going to recline, I want to make sure that it feels reflective of the now for me. And so I think I'm also trying to hint at some sort of that art historical lineage of the female body in an art form.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And this is a very a beautiful setting for that, as of course I'm posing all the what's the name, all the reclining nude women with their just little gauze little little fabric. I love this. Okay, so can you actually talk about sort of the importance of iconography, because you have all of these in the backgrounds, these wonderful patterns and layering, and then hidden pictures.
Right. Okay, so if you go back to the first one of my daughter and my husband, so so I grew up Catholic, and I still identify as Catholic, and I use a lot of imagery that in many ways I don't tell anyone what any of it means. But I can point out that every item or every object in that space is deeply meaningful to me. So for example, there's a rock right in front of my daughter, and I've always been really captured by the David and Goliath story. And my wish for my daughter is to be agile and to be flexible, and to have a rock when she meets her Goliath or Goliaths. And there's also stars around. She has this like star bracelet, and there's stars around her head, which is reflective of Mary. And so like there's little bits of information that to me it's not necessarily important that that viewers know exactly what it means to me, but it's a collage of artifacts that I think can build a sense of imagination around people and the complexity of people. My specificity, I don't know if is even needed, but to me, it's as though I'm looking at these people and that I deeply love, and I want to arm them with artifacts of love. And it's an imaginative, dream state of what are these things. Like my daughter's holding this or wearing this DNA sort of ornament. And my husband is a scientist, and he made this 3D print of this, this thing that he's been working on, this protein with this DNA. And so we made it into a necklace. And I feel like it's just all collaged and weaving in like the narratives of self along with the narratives of family, and then my wishes upon them. It doesn't necessarily make any kind of sense. It's just like a visual collage of deep, sincere wishes and ways I see the people that I love the most.
Yeah, I mean, in one way, this viewer, of course, is not going to know your specific intention, but they can sit there and find the objects and make their own story. And
Right.
then on the other side, I love that you have sort of, it's like the blessings at birth of different, characteristics or skills, or, that could have happened, whether fairy godmothers or the goddesses or the whatever fates or, so yeah, I love that. Could you maybe tell us a little bit about the process? Where does the work begin? Is it through like just sketching, or do you take reference photos or research? How do you, because they're so complex, where do you start?
So I don't plan anything, and I have an idea of, so if I'm going to draw a very specific person, I'll use a reference photo. So I know generally what they look like, but I try and not be too anchored to that photo because it will feel a little bit maybe too flat or something. I like to use sort of imaginative color, and that typically means I need to separate myself from the photo. So their faces are generally referenced by photo, but everything else I have to build with, I say the word, I read the piece, although that sounds very silly, but what's happening is it's the same way when you look at clouds and you're trying to create shapes from clouds. So it's a general offering. And then with your eye, you sort of mold and identify what it is that's next. And if I draw on Wednesday, it could look different on Thursday because I don't know what it is that I'm going to be shaping. I have an idea, but what these symbols mean, I might, there's this Jimi Hendrix song that talks about red and the color red. And so there's something really beautiful about like, oh, I'm going to create ribbons of red for someone that was in the Vietnam War. You know what I mean? Like there's kind of specific things that happen if I'm listening to music, then I'm, oh, this is the correct thing to do. But it could change. I mean, it's very much a sense of like being super present in the moment and then reading the piece and seeing what it needs. And so the process is really slippery. I don't really know how to even articulate what the process is other than I am present with the piece and I am actively engaging with problem solving in adding things and subtracting things. And there's lots of layers here. So I had to add something and then, oh, that didn't work. And then I'll put something over it. I also am really fascinated by surface. So when I can get to like, what is a sparkly surface? And then what's a matte surface? And then as a viewer, if I'm like moving around that surface, how does it sort of warp or how does it change? Yeah, for some reason, I really like multiple surfaces as well.
Yeah. I was really intrigued looking at your actually your Instagram page. You had some like in progress photos from this one, and I couldn't believe you had like the portraits in before pretty much a lot of the background and the baby came later.
Oh my gosh, I drew these 4 people and then I got pregnant and I was like, I have to wait to finish this piece because apparently someone else is coming and needs to get inside of me. So that was, you know, a whole thing. But yeah, it's
because like your daughter's like dress was complete and then all of a sudden
completely finished. Well, he disrupted that as well as the symmetry. I had this like perfect symmetry and I was like, okay, so we're just gonna move with this and see what happens. And there's lots of to me, family storytelling is really an intrinsic part of, so my husband's family is from the South, from South Carolina, and it's a really rich part of, it seems like the culture is talking about family and the storytelling that happens. And there's this feeling of a legend. There's just feelings of like, who's a legend and what it is that it's taken to get there. And so some of these objects, like that huge fish, that monstrous fish, this legendary fish that was caught. And it's seems to be so much about who I see them as, but also this like story that kind of comes with them as people. And so, yeah, there's lots of artifacts and objects that speak to how I see them, not necessarily who they are, but how I interpret who they are.
Yeah, well, I love it. I love that. Okay.
Can you ask me about the underwear drawings? Because I have to tell you, no one ever asks me about the underwear drawings.
Really?
And I'm because it's like
okay,
embarrassing. I don't know.
No. that was on. I have to ask about the underwear drawings because everyone comes in and they come in. They're like, "Oh, what is this?" They look like, "Is that underwear?" And they're so fascinated. They're like, "Is it a photograph?" And they're looking closer. It's like, "Oh my gosh, I can see the stitching drawn." You know, they're just so, everyone is just overwhelmed with the underwear. And actually, congratulations, we've sold one of them. I was meant to email you. So, so yes, please tell me about the underwear drawings in the Tondo format.
So, okay, one of the questions that you prompted, which I've never been asked, was what started this series? I don't know exactly what the question was, but it was something like, yeah, what started this? And no one's ever asked me what started this. And it's kind of a funny story.
Yeah.
So as a female, we go to the gynecologist, right? And so I'm sitting on this, I don't even know if you guys are embarrassed listening to this, but this is like a really intrinsic part, like a deeply sincere part of being a female is, so I'm sitting on the table with the robe on, and there's a pile of like my clothes haphazardly laying on the chair. And I'm looking at it and I'm finding this, I start laughing hysterically, which I'm sure everyone around me through the halls were like, what is this woman doing? I started laughing hysterically because I'm about to have had this conversation and this experience with my gynecologist who's delivered my children, who just knows me very well, but God forbid she sees my underwear and the menstruation stains that happen over years. And there was something hysterical about that even my gynecologist isn't privy to the evidence of having menstruations. Like it was so funny. And I was like, wow, there's so much either shame, or I don't know what this object is doing, or why it's so complex to females. It's an object that's supposed to be seen, intentionally meant to be seen, or not to be seen at all, under no circumstances. And to me, it felt like an object that was so reflective of this complex experience of just being a female, of just this nuance of complexity and ironies and absurdities. And so I thought, I need to just spend some time with, why do these objects make me, why do I have this relationship with these objects, unlike any other clothing I own? And so I started piling them together, and I started wanting these pairs, this like laundry of underwear. I wanted to trick people into thinking they're really beautiful. That's what I really wanted to do. I wanted to show like cotton underwear that I've had for years and years and years. And I just wanted to display them as deliciously beautiful. Like, I'm going to convince you. I'm going to put a gold frame around it. I'm going to make it look incredibly wonderful and beautiful. And it was almost as like, it was drawn with some anger, I have to say, like either anger with why I feel like there's this, shame perhaps around females, the female body. And I just wanted to like tap at it and like, just no, we're going to make this what it is, which is like beautifully complex. And also I wanted to make it like over the top beautiful. And so some of the frames have this like very elaborate Victorian-esque frames. And so those frames are typically used for portraiture. And so I like this idea of the stand-in for a face or a portrait, and just like a complex, objects of female underwear.
Yeah.
And yeah.
I love it. I'm going to see if I can flip the slide and get the right one. Oh, where's the one? They're not the gold ones though. Anyways, there's some of the frames.
I have one here because it literally came mailed back. So like super golden frames, really. I totally wanted to put this one in the show, but it literally came yesterday back from the mail. But it's like really, highly detailed. Yeah, I think it wants to draw you close. Like, I don't think you can view it from far away. It's one of those things. It's like reading a book. It's like you have to get pretty close to understand what it is that these objects are offering.
Yeah, sometimes people come in and think, well, maybe it's flowers or like dyed and spun wool, and then they go up closer, and of course, then they find it's underwear, and that has really intrigued so many people. So I am absolutely intrigued by bloom. We have this, they're gorgeously drawn with their succulence and yarn, and then you notice these sort of anatomical and visceral qualities. And I was just kind of want to know if you could tell us about these drawings.
So when I was pregnant, I spent absolutely no time painting or drawing. And I had not, there was not any part of me that wanted to engage with creating anything. I was fully doing that as far as I was concerned. But I spent all of that time sort of reflecting on what is happening inside of my body. It is rapidly changing and constantly changing. And so I thought a lot about what it felt like and not what it perhaps looked like. And so to me, it felt like ribbons, particularly the birthing process felt like a squeezing of ribbons and then letting go. And so I spent a lot of time thinking about ribbons or rope and how they're feeling as though there's a squeeze and also sort of a relaxed state. And so I wanted to create images that felt very reflective of that very specific time in my life. And so much of that felt like a bursting, overwhelming bloom that was rooted in discomfort, but also integral to evolution, or, like moving this process forward. And so the full bloom was me feeling as though I am fully carrying another human inside of my body, which I say that with, like, some people think that's like, yeah, she's pregnant. Like, we should call, like, there was another human, like, inside of my body. Like, that was so that couldn't have been more transformative in how I understood myself, how I understood other people. Like, I remember leaving the hospital and I saw a homeless person, and I was like, oh my God, they have a mom, they have a dad. Like, this, everything looked different. Everything appeared differently to me. And that process of just giving birth, but also being pregnant, it's just, I won't ever be able to see anything the same again. It kind of was a pivot point in my life, and just the intensity of being pregnant. And so I had to spend time figuring out and kind of meditating on what was my body doing, and how can I make images that I feel relate to the feeling of being pregnant, not necessarily anatomically what it looked like. So yeah, I made a lot of large blooming oval objects, or and I also felt like I was wild. I don't know how another way of saying that, but I think I move around the world distinguishing myself from nature. Like, I'm somehow very separate from it. But having no control over my body in this way, and kind of understanding that I am part of wild nature. Like, I am wild. Like, this is, to me, it was also fusing together those things, of fusing together maybe a placenta with some florals. Like, how do I fuse these two opposite, seemingly what felt opposite, and see them as a singular unit? Because that felt more honest to me, but it also felt scary and dangerous. Like, oh, that I am part of wild nature. I don't know if that explains any of that, but there are lots of moving parts in my head with
Yeah.
it was to be pregnant. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. And two things just there with the flowers, it actually does seem really to relate, because isn't that where the flower, and then right there is where they bake the seeds on the plant. So that definitely relates. And then the other thing that you mentioned about having a whole another human inside of you, I was listening to an interview recently, and they described it as your first house is your mother, like a baby's first house is inside a human body. So I don't know, it just, I can see where you were coming from. It made me think of that. Well, thank you so much for sharing all of that. I'm going to actually put Michael on the spot now, I think.
Thank you for letting me indulge all of my, yes, to all of you. Thank you for letting me chat for so long.
Oh no, it's great. Okay, Michael, can you tell us, or would you share with us sort of about the point of tension between beauty and despair, between living and dying, and how this influences your work?
Yeah, and I would like to say that it was really wonderful hearing Jillian talk about her work, and I feel an immense amount of pressure to follow that. It's so thoughtful and sort of reflective. I don't know, my work I think tends to be incredibly more selfish, sort of self-indulgent, I think. Just as I've sort of, I don't know, settled into life and sort of saw time passing by and lost people in my life, and reflecting on that, and really, I guess, I don't know how to explain it very well. I guess there's a part of my work that's always trying, like, that wants to indulge this sort of sadness in a way that's God, how to say it? It's where it's sort of a woe is me self-pity, you know what I mean? Like, there's sort of a Charlie Brown-esque quality to it in my own mind when I think of these things, that, you know, these experiences aren't unique to me, and this sort of indulgence I kind of allow myself to sort of go travel down when I think about things, is, oh man, I'm trying to, like, I guess, put this in words that make sense to somebody else, maybe. I think a lot of it stemmed from just growing older, as I said, and just seeing, like, you know, people you love age, and they're, you know, like, my wife was somebody whose hair started turning gray, and her mother has, like, this wonderful white gray hair, you know, it's really, really beautiful. But seeing my wife, you know, hair start to go that way, and just feeling, you know, sort of time passing, it kind of goes to the idea of, like, beauty and the contemporary sublime, and this idea of, like, you know, what makes a flower beautiful is the fact that it's in a state of death, in a way, you know, like, we don't, if we sat down in a fancy restaurant and there was a pile of flowers on the table, and we thought, oh, what lovely flowers, and then we realized they were silk flowers, their beauty would sort of evaporate to us. You know, I think what makes them beautiful is the fact that they're these fragile things that are living and dying simultaneously right in front of our eyes. And I guess at some point, I was really attracted to that sort of idea. But I think it was also balanced with this temperament of seeing, I guess, sadness in it and joy in it at the same time. And I often kind of sort of, I sort of point to Charlie Chaplin, the movie City Lights, as an easy way to kind of explain how I think about work when I make it. I think City Lights is, like, one of my favorite films, and I think it is because it just caught me off guard. It was really unexpected that at the end of the movie, I actually had a really emotional reaction to the film's closing scene. And I really thought about, like, why did I have that reaction, you know? And I think it's because the movie was sort of so heartfelt, you know. It was funny at times, and it was cruel at times. It was very uplifting. It was sad. There was just a whole level of emotional complexity there that really resonated with me. And I've always sort of aspired in my own mind, like, if I could make a drawing that sort of had the emotional complexity of that film, that would be the greatest thing ever. So when I tend to make work, I try to then infuse it with a sense of seriousness and longing or sadness. But then there's always a part of me that wants to find comedy and theatrics in it, and that sort of Charlie Brown self-pity. And to me, it's the mingling of all of those things, you know. When they work well in something, then that's when I think I'm my happiest, you know. So I hope that kind of answered the question, you know. Like, to me, beauty and despair, you know, and living and dying, I think, like, every day is sort of a gift. And then at the same time, when you think of it that way, there's sort of like this awareness that it's not permanent, you know, like that it's almost like how you you know, like, you choose your reality every day. And I think as I've gotten older and I've tried to reconcile, you know, sort of certain sadnesses in my life, a lot of that has, like, I really try to think of that way a lot, like, try to remind myself that I get to control how I feel each day in terms of how I view things. But, you know, when I make my work, it's normally oscillating between, you know, addressing something that seems kind of personal and painful, and also sort of having fun with it. And I don't know, I just like that game. And as I said, I think it just stems from that, from what City Lights accomplished for me, which was it just highlighted, you know, that intimacy, I think, comes from that complexity. Like, I felt touched by something, you know, a film that was made like 100 years ago, not quite 100 years ago, but that I could be reached through time and touched that way, just through this very sincere sort of reckoning of this whole complex set of feelings that go into just our navigation, right, of life. So anyway, so, you know, and then we look at this scene and it's sort of like, what is he talking about? You know, you look at this drawing and there's so many weird things happening in it, and you're like, how in the world does he get from that sort of space to this sort of image? And you know, all I can say is that's what I'm thinking about when I make it. Like, there's a certain amount of comedy in there that I approach it with a certain amount of comedy, even though there's an underlying bleakness at times to some of the things that I'm sort of addressing or thinking about.
Well, that really does actually hit something there with Charlie Chaplin, because his movies do have that combination of comedy and some, I want to say sorrow, but I don't think that's the right word. And I can't think of City Lights specifically right now, so I'll have to go back and check it out. I'm very intrigued. But you said two other things, and actually just so that I have more change the image. You mentioned the flowers are being so much more beautiful because they are temporary. It's such a fragile temporary moment when they are at their peak and their bloom. And often, if they were cut on the table in a fancy restaurant, they are in the process of dying more quickly than they would have been still on their plant. And the other thing you had mentioned about that kind of struck was the you felt sort of self-indulgent because everyone you know, experiences loss or, you know, time passing and such. But I think as artists, it is often our job, but I mean, it really speaks to addressing these thoughts and emotions and imagery, so it helps other people sort of relate with those thoughts and feelings of their own. I think, but specifically, the Charlie Chaplin, your images though can be macabre, but you have so many playful elements going on, and they're so complex at the same time. So
I mean, like with this piece, I mean, there's two things I should just throw in there that are really easy to address in this piece, where it's like that, like conflicted qualities. And in the center piece there, you know, there's the anatomical bunny rabbit, you know, and to me that summarizes a lot of things in the sense that we have this symbol obviously for procreation, but then we have anatomy, of course, which represents quite clearly death. And, you know, I like the idea that, you know, we are given life, and at the same time we're given our death. You know, by being alive, we're destined to die. So there's so even that's what Dust and Moonshine are about, which are the two pieces that flank it in this image. You know, Dust is the one with the female figure, and it's sort of about this idea of our physicality sort of eventually evaporating, and then this sort of magical sort of inner, this sort of magical other space that exists on the other side of that, which is Moonshine, which is the figure on the other side. And to me, it's sort of about, you know, the figure sort of transforming from a living state to a dying state, and then the sort of dying figure sort of uttering itself into a living state again. Like there's this constant cycling, and it isn't so much the idea that I believe in reincarnation or something like that. Is it? But I am sort of interested in this idea of living and dying, and you know, obviously even Jillian was addressing, you know, the miracle of having children and stuff like that, and what an amazing sort of experience that is. I obviously didn't get to experience it firsthand, but for the longest time, you know, sort of thought about having a family, and I do have a daughter now. The piece in the middle there predates her birth, And it really actually stemmed from that time in my life where it was thinking about what it would mean to have a child, and sort of even fears of what it would mean, to have a child and bring them into the world, and sort of the inherent beauty and tragedy of it. As I said, I just walk around you must think my wife must have so much to deal with, like in terms of like me. I'm normally not this melancholy sitting around contemplating these things, but they are sort of like the current that I find curious to think about when I make art. So, I don't, I guess I don't sit in the lounger upstairs and, wonder about all these things and think about them. But they are sort of this thing that I find curious and interesting, because I'm not really interested in it's weird because there's all this sort of death imagery and I talk about death, but it's almost like a lot of my interest in anatomy and skeletons is really associated to sort of physicality, like almost like pain, and, like us being these these forms that move through the world and interact with other bodies, and so I cover them in glitter and I do all these other things, and it's all this sort of way to complicate the forms, because I think sometimes we attribute very narrow ideas to what we think forms mean, and I like the idea of sort of complicating them. So.
Well, you mentioned smearing them in glitter. I absolutely love the fact, and you've used glitter and glow-in-the-dark paint, and then you have these like highly rendered drawings and anatomical studies. And I'm just kind of curious because it plays an interesting tension between that tight, serious drawing and the use of the vibrant colors, which can reference anatomy textbook illustrations. And then, like I said, the added elements. So did you start sort of as a tight technician with drawing, and then eventually move to these more sort of contemporary materials, or the mode of anything goes, or or was it the vice versa, or have you always just like whatever you could find to spin an image?
And I would say for the longest time, actually, I was really pretty narrow in my materials. I mean, I did a lot of largely, well, I got my MFA in painting, so I used to make oil paintings. But then when I graduated, I didn't have ventilation. I just moved into drawing. But then I sort of missed the surfaces of paintings in a way. So I developed a lot of layering and material processes in my drawings that allowed me to feel like I physically engaged their surfaces more. But over time, like as I moved into some of the work that you're seeing here, it was actually a transition to start incorporating more materials. And I think it was really done as an effort to talk about different sort of planes of experience to me. Like the bodies I treated in this one material way that gave them a very tactile, physical quality to them, or presence to them, to me. And then I went to this very flat graphic way of painting in the backgrounds to just highlight their difference, but also to kind of shift the plane in my own way of thinking. Like the figures are supposed to feel physical and real, but then the spaces are supposed to feel magical. Like there's supposed to be a conscious sort of space, or a subconscious space, an imagined space. And once I sort of allowed that to happen in the drawings, then it sort of freed me to just allow anything to happen in those spaces, because they weren't tethered to sort of a reality any longer. They became sort of a place where desires or fears or other things could manifest. And so then the voicing just sort of took over. I started switching, different materials for different parts to sort of heighten them and highlight their uniqueness. But then at the same time, I like the complexity of trying to bring all those materials together. I was also, along with that idea of, the emotional glaring and complexity of like Chaplin films or something, I was also really interested in like the idea of spectacle and triviality. So, I mean, in some of these images, there's like clip art cupids, and or cherubs, and they're deliberately clip art. People are like, your cherubs look a little stiff, and it's like, well, they're clip art. Like this one, yeah. All of these, almost every cherub in these are clip art. And because I thought, how funny, you know, we're going to die and clip art's going to take us to heaven. It just seems so banal, and I don't know. So then the same with glitter. It's like, it's considered like the venereal disease of craft, you know. I mean, it's like this hideous thing, but then at the same time, it's so glamorously fantastic and silly. So I kind of enjoyed that idea of excess to the point of becoming meaningless on some levels. Like it heightens the sense of absurdity to me. You know, so there's this real just like one of the pieces that's in this series that unfortunately I wasn't able to include, that's part of the series that is now on the screen, like, and is part of the pieces that I'm working on right now, is this sort of like vortex that these figures are going into, these hypno spirals. And I've now started creating hypno spirals that lead into hypno spirals. That's my next joke. Like, I like the idea that there's this portal, you know, these hypno spirals became portals at some point to me, you know, and I thought it was really interesting that this portal would just sort of like there's this sense that maybe it would lead to something, but it really just leads to another portal and another portal. So it just, there's no answers to be found. So I like the idea that we seem like we're going somewhere, but it's really just from one shredder into another shredder. And there's really nothing clear about where any of that is going. To me, there's something horrifying about that and absolutely ridiculously funny about it at the same time. If I could make a painting that was really just like a figure getting sucked into a vortex, into a vortex, into a vortex, that just wrap the whole gallery, I would probably just laugh myself silly at how that's where I go when I go off the deep end of like there's all this potential for something. There's all this, you know, movement in sort of the world that we're going towards something, but it's always this unknown to another unknown to another unknown sort of idea. So anyway, I'm sort of rambling off the point probably.
Yeah, no, I love that. And I think you should make the figure going from portal to portal. Or maybe you should get into video, I don't know. So I just want to, I have a couple questions left though. How planned out, just process wise, I'm curious, how planned out are your compositions? They're so complex. I mean, like Jillian's, I was surprised to hear how much that just kind of happened on the spot. Do you plan yours out more fully when drawing?
No, I mean, like I hired well, Michael became a skeleton there, but Michael and Jasmine in the image on the left, you know, they came out, and I intentionally went through efforts to hire a couple that I could have pose together for me, and they drove in, and I worked with them for a couple weekends drawing, and it really started with them. I didn't really have any idea of what I was going to do with them, frankly. They came in, and then we just started drawing. So and then once they sort of had this framework of how they're sitting there, then Michael eventually became the skeleton, and then it sort of opened up from there. But you know, once I started seeing a structure like this series, like that these are part of, you know, there's this central egg form that sort of circles around the figure, and there's sort of these framing elements, and like once I sort of created that formula, then I did intentionally try to adopt it into future pieces as a design element, you know, because I like this idea of them, of this egg form and this decorative quality and this framing, you know. As I said, I used to have the figures, there were these elements sort of operating in the background in a way that really wasn't, like it wasn't compartmentalized or forced to play any specific game. They just sort of happened how they happened. And here, though, I did make a conscious effort to sort of almost frame things. So like these, and I painted them in a way that tried to make them look almost like cake icing and really luscious. And those framing elements is sort of where this drama unfolds. So we sort of see the figures and sort of this relationship between them. But then sort of the story, you know, to me, the like there's this underlying terror and playfulness at the same time in the elements that go around it. And once again, that I think really speaks more to like theater or something, you know, like there's this really theatrical, excessive, you know, poorly, I would like to say, I would like to hope, poorly acted scene around the edges, you know, like a melodrama, you know, like a really poorly acted melodrama, like General Hospital or something, in which the, you know, there's something so farcically ridiculous about it, but sort of morbidly terrifying. So yeah, once again, you'll see that I can keep going back to those same things, because once again, I think that's where, to me, there's that point of tension. I think back to your first question, you know, of like, you know, how far can you push sort of the darkness of the content and the absurdity of the content, and sort of put them together in a way that somehow makes it seem beautiful and sort of fun and inviting, even though really weird things are sort of permeating the entire image. And yeah, that's where the fun is for me. So
Yeah.
and I do consider making art, by the way, a game, I guess. Like, you know, you talk about the compositions and how Jillian approaches hers. You know, I've talked with Jillian before, and I'm always impressed how she just sort of like materializes these things from her mind. You know, I go through a lot of like trial and error and sketching and stuff, and but it is a puzzle for me. It's like, it is a game. I like moving things around and forcing interactions and trying to make the complexity of those interactions more multifaceted, more complicated, or more opaque even at times. Like I want the read and the mood, or how you oscillate between parts to sort of feel easy, but you know,
do you move them? I'm sorry. No. Do you move them around on these large pieces, or is that done like on like separately?
Well, so like these, like I always start my drawings on really quite huge pieces of paper. I normally probably cut, I don't know, a sheet of paper that's roughly 4 feet by 6 feet most of the time. And I just start drawing on it. And then once I sort of have a composition, I kind of measure it out. And that's why they're always such odd dimensions, like 42 and an eighth, you know, by 22 and, you know, 5/8, you know, it's just randomness. And it's just because I somehow my brain works better when I just move around on the paper, and then I sort of whittle it into something I like. And then once I found that, it's actually pretty well developed before I mount it onto a panel and start building it up. But once I hit that point, I don't really modify my work much, you know, like like once I start going into actually like the mechanical part of producing it and trying to render it, it's pretty much all there. But there is a lot of play at the beginning, moving things around, trying to see what will work and what doesn't. I mean, that the image on the left, for instance, it used to have 2 scenes in those top left corners, and then a top left and right corner, but then I didn't like them, and I simplified them into those optic patterns, which were big in my work. You see those plus minus things, you know. People sometimes asked if they were referencing like pregnancy tests, things like that, but they're really vision tests, you know, off of these old stereo cards that I have, stereoscope cards. It's supposed to tell if you have like what's that called when you have like that double vision, I forget now. But I like the idea of that symbol as being one of sort of chance and the variables in chance, you know. So like the plus, the minus, the hat, you know, like how they align and the possibilities. It's almost like a code. So that symbol comes up in a lot in my work, and no one would probably understand why. But similar, like Jillian says, she points to these things that have sort of significance to her thinking when she's making work. Those are always something that kind of pops up as like this variable, this chance variable, you know, and it kind of ties back to perception to me. So how you choose to see something, you know, like even when I said, oh, you know, I can wake up and say, well, you know, I got to choose my reality, I got to choose how I feel today. it's sort of that idea, that empowerment idea of, you know, what do we see when, you know, how do we take in something, you know, and digest it and understand it. And that's why with these images, I think some people could see them as being really bleak and sort of upsetting, and other people could find them really beautiful and funny. And that's, as I said, what draws me into trying to make them.
I wanted to ask, one of the things, you know, viewers notice is the differing skin blemishes depicted on the models. And it is repeated in most of the works. And I'm just interested in what, well, I want to know, everybody wants to know, what is your interest in depicting, but also making beautiful these blemishes?
Yeah, it actually goes back to, I don't know, when I was in my late 30s, I started getting this really harsh looking rash on my face. And it was strange because I don't think I'm normally not super conscious of myself, you know, so but it made me very conscious of myself. So I'd be talking to people and I'd kind of feel it on my skin and everything. And I didn't know how to cope with it. I got an appointment with a dermatologist, but I went out and I bought this is a horribly long story. But anyway, I'll make it short. I went out and bought this turtleneck from Kohl's, because for some reason I had this idea, I'm going to draw my self-portrait, but I'm going to rug it myself up, because in the 70s, you know, masculinity allowed for like
Turtlenecks
or like pockmarked skin. Like there's a certain ruggedness, you know, that you could get away with in the 70s, you know. So like Steve McQueen, he's like this macho bullet era sort of figure to me. So I thought, oh, I'm gonna get a turtleneck like a la Steve McQueen, and I'm gonna like own this face rash. So I went and did that, but then the only turtleneck they had at Kohl's made me look like absurd. I put it on in the dressing room and I just started laughing so hard, like tears were coming out my eyes. I was like, oh my God, I look like a marshmallow. I look like an idiot, you know, but then I was like, it made it all the better. So then I bought it and I went home and I drew the self-portrait. And then that's actually where the booger monsters came into existence. And they were sort of this sense of being dirty or unclean, you know, because I didn't really know how to think about it. It turned out to just be face dandruff. So not very dramatic or anything. And I guess it's very common for men, especially, to develop it as they get close to 40. Easy to treat with a cream, but it sort of just naturally went away on its own. But at the same time, I was sort of becoming self-conscious of skin. But then it started to become like this, to me, it became emblematic of this idea of our body meeting the world, right? How our skin is the point of contact. And when we look at bodies, we always, like, even when I teach life drawing, it's sort of like, oh, we look at bodies, but what is the first thing we actually see that we don't even think about? And that's the surface of the body, or the skin. And I liked it as this sort of this point of contact with the world, and how it over time shows scars and blemishes. And that's sort of like these badges we all earn, like that show that we persevere, right? That we have lived. So I think there's something really beautiful about imperfect skin. I think it just shows a life lived in a way, to me, that is beautiful. And then when it came to like the purple hands and stuff, it was because when I was a child, I had really bad migraines and other issues. And one of the oddest sort of byproducts of that was when I got really sick, my hands would turn purple. And they'd get really cold, and I'd sort of lose circulation in my limbs. And, you know, the doctors were always sort of curious about that. So I've always been fascinated with sort of like these cold sort of purple hands, and this skin that sort of carries with it this sort of mark of the world. So that's where that all came from. But it first entered my work out of just a very narcissistic need to cope with my face dandruff. It's like, I got face dandruff. What am I going to do? Yeah.
Well, that's the interesting thing, is because when we do get, you know, blemishes or something, we become so self-conscious, but the way they are handled, you know, on the drawings, you know, with a little bit of glitter or something, it's really beautiful. So I was just kind of intrigued. Yeah, and then you did reference the weird, bizarre creatures in the background, and really well.
Yeah, I have fancy names for everything. You know, Jillian is so wonderful. You know, and that's why I'm saying I follow Jillian, and she's talking about all these beautiful things and these transformative experiences, and then I talk about what I call booger monsters, which are my things floating in the background, and then I have like my vomit ghosts, which is what I call the little organ things that fly out of people. So yeah,
I don't know,
I'm
Michael.
taking it down a notch.
I don't know. I think, you know, you're referencing a dermatologist. I'm referencing a gynecologist. I think it's Brian's turn to like really listen.
We'll have to see who he references.
Proctology. Oh, this is great. Well, maybe with that, I will bring up some of Brian's work.
Yes.
Here we go. So, Brian, in your statement, you talked about your interest and frustration with working to understand others. And I want to know if you could explain a little bit about how empathy relates to your work.
Thanks. I love this question. And I think it all has to start from a visit to a proctologist. Oh my goodness. So,
You had to take it there.
I had to take it there. You know, I think that it's been, these last couple of years have been a little hard. They've been really complicated, and it's been complicated to make things. I think so much of my work is about trying to understand the world. And I do that through putting myself in another person. So in that way, like I'm always trying to be like, well, what's it like from over there? What's it like from over here? And I feel like over the last few years that's been kind of detrimental, that it hasn't been this sort of positive experience that or a learning experience. And I feel like it's been more draining and less sort of like enlightening than it has before in the past. And in that way, it seems like, I think trying to describe and focus on like trying to describe these groups of people all sort of gaining together, forming community and working together, that like, I'm trying to use empathy and understanding and to make these decent, to make them decent people. They do bad things and wrong things and weird things. But I also think like, it can be really hard, especially with the isolation and what's going on with the pandemic and with the sort of like political climate that we've had since 2015, that it can be really hard to trust groups of people. And I kind of think that that's a major starting point for my work, is that there is something that's not trustworthy in that, like about a collective. Seeing an individual sort of at work, that we can sort of empathize, you know, looking at Michael's work and seeing those like characters there and their expression. Even though they're melodramatic, like we can just think like, oh, that's them being, you know, like a little bit over the top, but I mean, it's still extreme and I feel for them. And I feel like it's harder to have that sense about it whenever they're sitting right next to somebody that's ignoring it, or sitting right next to somebody that's also just sort of like casually having a conversation. So in that way, I feel like that sort of empathy putting towards other people it has always been a starting point for where my art comes from and where my images come from, but also has been somewhat of a painful experience recently, which is, I think, bizarre and difficult.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting with like empathy and with so much been going on, trying to understand others and their situation, and sometimes you get frustrated because you feel like there's other groups of people who maybe aren't trying to empathize, and that is also very draining. And the other thing that you mentioned, talking about trust, there's been so much need for trust and support to like get through these, you know, trying few years. And then there's been maybe different political climates at times where trust has been difficult, and you know, there's times when you're not sure who was, well, if you can believe what's being told, or you know you shouldn't, and then other times you're like, well, why don't these people believe these, you know, other groups? So yeah, there's Yeah, I definitely feel, I mean, when you first kind of come into the space with your work, you know, I find the sort of like the intrigue and just you know, these bizarre sort of surreal kind of like the representational images, and then kind of start pulling into these ideas of what's going on culturally, and I lost my thought. I was really going somewhere there.
Right. Collectively, like, what is it that
Yeah.
this, like, what are they doing together? Like, why are they there? And I think, like, you know, what I like is, I mean, I feel like that's the questions that I ask while I'm making it. Like, what are these people doing together? And sort of trying to invent and create and understand that myself. And a lot of times it seems like, I mean, it is like clearly a reflection of my reality. Sometimes it's more political, and sometimes it's very personal. I try and make it, and I think I'm a lot like Michael. I think that I have a hard time making a statement that feels overly singular. Um, and that if it feels like it's too singular, then it feels sort of incorrect, right? That it can be wrong, and then it can be proven wrong, and that it seems to be unaware. So I need to add that sense of awareness of it to make it more complicated.
Mhm.
I love talking about that trust there and thinking about that. Um, I like to include words in here a lot, and sometimes they're a little bit like more difficult to see. Like welcome on the right has a welcome mat where you can see it. But
Mm.
I sometimes I have a I guess it's something about me that whenever there are words occurring in an artwork, I think sometimes it can be too directed, like it can be direct you too strongly to be like, oh, this is the interpretive device that I'm given to understand this image. And I feel like I like to do that with words, but in a way that like I think all the words that I put in every piece that's in the show is like somewhat of a lie. And I think that that makes it really exciting seeing this like large sort of monolithic space listed as our house. um I would hope that somebody would look at that and think that like, well, who is claiming that it's ours?
Mhm.
Because there's clearly like they're delineating the difference between yours and ours. And is it really ours? Because it doesn't seem like, you know, all of us are in there. And I like the idea that like a word can happen in a piece and no longer be static or like be held firm, that it can then loosely be interpreted that like, no, this also means the opposite. And I feel like when something can mean it's a statement and it's opposite, that like that's where I think real interpretation and like enjoyment and like reading and pleasure, you know, like that's where it all, I feel like that's where all of the excitement happens.
Oh yeah, with like our house, it doesn't seem um, well, in one way you have all these, I want to call them bears, but I definitely see them as disguised people, you know, and whether they are helping each other or trying to get in and take over. And um and smokestacks, I don't know, it's like, why would they want to be getting into, maybe they're trying to rescue the people out, I don't know, it's such an intriguing picture to just like contemplate. Yeah, and then with welcome, the house is completely empty and everyone else is hiding on the roof. So um, which I don't know, and in a way I guess during uh, COVID we've been having to visit outside too, so I don't know, kind of interesting.
Yeah, I like to think, I think with those bear suits, they do a nice way of sort of like putting everybody like that they're on the same page, like they're all in agreement because they all wore the same outfit.
Mhm.
um which I guess is something that I don't want to do ever, right? Do you know what I mean? If my wife puts on like the same color shirt before we leave the house, it's like an argument about who put it on first, right? You know, like, no, I've been wearing this, I put this on, like I didn't see what you put on before, like I set this shirt out to put on last night, you know. um but and part of it is that it does seem to like lose that, like you lose that part of your personality to like who you are within that group. it's sending a symbol of like who you are and how you relate to that. And it undermines your ability to be seen as an individual. And especially with those faces not being able to be seen. I really love getting caught up with like both Jillian and Michael's work and seeing the faces and the expressions and thinking about like what is happening within that. And I felt with my work, I get distracted by that. And I think like, why are they sad? Why are they feeling these ways? So by undoing that and mimicking, or why are they angry? And a lot of times it might have just been a slip of the pen that's like, oh, I gave him angry eyebrows instead, you know? And I feel like I can sort of undo that by being like, oh, well, we don't get to see their faces. What we have to do is we only get to understand them through like our expression and our relationship to them, what we think we would be feeling.
So when you were here at the gallery, I had a chance to talk to you a little bit about some of the works, and I loved you had started to talk about the Minotaur and sort of Greek tragedies, Greek myths. And would you share some of that background with us now? And especially because the pink rope string, it seems to be in most, if not all, of the drawings. If you could talk about those.
Well, whenever I think in about 2015, 2016, I had a hard time drawing people. And I think because that empathy was really hard, but I still wanted to make work. So I gave myself a lot of space, but I made sure that I worked. And I would have these sort of babying conversations with myself, like, okay, Brian, what can you do today? I'm like, I can draw. Like, okay, what do you feel like drawing, Brian? I can draw string. Okay, let's draw some string today, Brian. You know, and then like, you know, and it would be like about 3 hours of just drawing string, and I'd be like, look, I did a great job, and like, yeah, you did some work today, Brian, good job. And that was sort of the type of discussion that I would need to be able to do to walk myself through being able to make. And a big part of it was that like, I don't want to worry about like, how do I feel about this person? How do I feel about this community? How do I feel about that? And it's just like, this kind of looks like string, it kind of doesn't. And I think about like 6 months just drawing string and fabric. And it's still something that I love to do, but I'm a storyteller at heart, and I want to be able to get to telling those stories. And sometimes I have big plans, and other times I'm like, I'm just going to approach a drawing. So this one, it's like, I didn't make any plans. I just went there. I had 2 pens. No, I just had 1 pen, or I had my multiple pens that I'm drawing with. And I just started going on that paper. And I had been listening to and reading up on my Greek myths and thinking about Ariadne. I don't know. I can't say. I'm not very good with Greek names, and she's got a D and an N next to each other in a weird way. So, but she's a part of Theseus's story, I think, where he like goes into the labyrinth and like kills a bull, right? And everything that he does in order to achieve that is because of Ariadne, who's like the daughter of the king Minos, I think. And she's like, oh, you're gonna go in there and face him? Like, well, here's a sword. And he's like, cool. And then she's like, here's some thread. Take that with you, tie it to something at the beginning, because it's a labyrinth. Do you know what that is? It's a maze, okay? Because he didn't seem like he was that bright. He just thought he was going to take care of this, right? So he obviously like had a great personality, right? Or something. And because she liked him a lot, she thought, I'm going to help you kill that Minotaur that's actually my half brother, because my mom like slept with a bull. But, you know, we don't need to talk about that right now. So he goes and he kills him and he leaves. And it's sort of tragic to think that she helped to kill her like half brother, but I guess he ate people, so they had like a history of problems between them and their family. But there's so much to think about with this story. And the most boring person in it is Theseus. They eventually like leave. They take a boat and they leave this island, and they bring Ariadne with them. And it must have been a romantic ship, right? But they also probably like found out a lot of things with themselves, because the next part of the story is that he just ditches Ariadne and like leaves her on a beach so that he can go and continue to like, I don't know, be a hero somewhere else. And even though that, like, and in some of those stories she dies there, and that's like the end of her sort of story, and it's over. And in other stories she then meets Dionysus and becomes Dionysus's wife, and the two of them are equals and seen as being like big parts of this, you know. And Dionysus, of course, like became one of the biggest sort of Greek gods later on, right? But to think about like all of the possibilities for this woman and the sort of dismissiveness that Theseus has, and just sort of like, I mean, how interesting her story is and how boring his is, right? I mean, and he's the one that killed the Minotaur. I just like thinking about this sort of like possibility of what all could be there. And of course the what have you done for me lately, right? Well, seems to be a reference to what, you know, how, what's he saying to Ariadne, like, what have you done for me lately? Sure, you gave me like the thread so that I could kill this Minotaur. Sure, you gave me the sword. You kind of did it all for me, but you know, since we've been on this boat in the last like 12 hours, what have you done for me lately? You know, and I think it's like an empowering statement, you know, from Janet Jackson. And it's sort of like a dismissive statement. I just like have so many feelings about it that I don't know if I'd ever like to hear that, or if I'd ever like to say that. I don't think anybody ever wants to hear that statement, but it also seems to describe so much of what's happening within that narrative, and all of the complications about how can you feel about a Minotaur and Ariadne, and I mean, it's a great thing that he ditches her because she finds like true love with Dionysus, who's like a much better guy, right? He's chill, he likes partying and drinking, right? I mean, like, he's a much better fit, right? Let's go with him.
I'm glad it worked out for her. But I love that.
Thank you. And I mean, I love getting the opportunity to just like to express and find these things, you know. And a big part of me is that I hear stories and I think about them later, and I walk around with them and I think about them, and I think this working on art and doing that is an opportunity for me to like, well, figure out, what do I feel about that? Why is it complicated? You know, is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? Are there good or bad things? You know, and they offer that opportunity for me to offer sort of like contradicting and opposing viewpoints. And yeah,
I love safety is our first priority, because up close it's this congested beach scene. Everyone's really close. There's like interactions, and it in itself looks like a maze. Like you have to like ponder your way through the beach, whether it's like one of those children's you know, highlights magazine where they trace their finger through the maze of on the beach or something. And then as you step back, the text appears, which of course from this view we can see. And you know, I love that it can be read differently, you know, both ways. What can you tell us about this work?
well, this one I'm really excited about this one, and there's so many things in there. Thinking about beaches, I mean, I grew up near a beach. I don't really like beaches, but I know that everybody that would come to visit would always be like, hey, we need to go to the beach. So I understand it as a complex space. I still see it as a relaxing space, but it's not necessarily a space for me. And I think that seems like a good starting point to think about like a beach scene. And I think a lot of it is that spaces like this have sort of changed for me, or for people in general. That like, you know, we grew up where there were large beach parties where they would just go nuts on the beach, and there'd be hundreds of people, and that seemed exciting. And I got to tell you that, I mean, I was never a big crowd person, but it seems that much less appealing to me to sort of go to. I also think like, I mean, I feel like it really describes this last year in the way that like I've had so many conversations with people, and I don't want to make people feel judged, but everybody that I've talked to has said that they've been really safe, right? And that they've made really good decisions, right? And I think most of those people are being honest and being true. I think all of those people are being honest, but I think but I don't think all of those people are necessarily have been quite as safe as I have, or have really put safety as high as they are saying. But I think everybody has to be in this world where they feel like they have been, right? And I wanted to try and describe that feeling between hearing somebody say that, like, that they're really concerned about being safe, and then also having that feeling of like, what does that mean to them, right? So in that way, I think, like, by saying safety is our first priority, and saying I don't really, it's not really borne out anywhere else in that image, right? There are like just a lot of people hanging out, relaxing, drinking, partying. And I mean, having been to a bunch of parties like this, I don't think that safety is necessarily people's first priority whenever they're partying. So I like to try and describe that feeling between like reading something or having something said to you that's not true. And being able to sort of like feel that and understand that, and like what it's like to exist whenever you're having to like determine whether something is, I mean, it's truthful. You know, everybody that said it to me, it was telling the truth, right? At least from their point of view. But it doesn't necessarily describe the reality of it. So
yeah, I was just gonna say, because it's like everyone's idea of what is safe is different. It's like for some people, being safe means we are staying home and we're not going out, and when we only, except for when we have to, and we wear our masks and everything else. And for other people, it's, you know, we wear a mask, but we also let our kids still go do play dates and slumber parties and things. And I'm like, really? Oh, okay. Well, not judgy.
Right. Well, and I mean, we've always heard people talking about when, I mean, having kids makes it more complicated too. And I mean, everybody says that, like, oh, we make really healthy decisions with our food that we eat as a family, right? I've never met anybody that hasn't said that. Do you know what I mean? But I met a lot of people that like eat nothing but like mac and cheese and hot dogs, you know? And I wish that I could live that lifestyle, you know, but I'm lactose intolerant and I probably shouldn't be doing that, you know? So, but,
yeah, and then also like, and even like institutionally, like your Home Depot, you have masks are required, and it's on the signs, everyone must wear their mask to come in, but it is absolutely not enforced at all, and everybody is just coming in and out willy-nilly. So.
Well, and I think I've had so many thoughts and confusions about like what this means and what it's about. And I think like my description of it may be a little bit more serious. And because I think that it should be, I intend it to be playful and not necessarily judgmental for people to think like, well, has safety been my first priority? I think it's mostly about like being able to witness the difference between like what somebody says and what somebody's doing. And I think there's something really thrilling and off-putting about that, whether it's like humorous, like I don't expect people to sort of laugh out loud, but I do sort of I think that it's playful and fun to be able to experience like that kind of like cognitive dissonance, like to be able to witness it and to like be a part of it, I think is thrilling and kind of fun.
Yeah.
I also, they're not in bear suits in that one. I thought it seemed appropriate to put them in rat or mice suits. So, you know, whether or not you want to bring in Disney as far as it being a mouse suit, that's fine with me. I'm all right with that.
So would you talk a little bit, I mean, we've talked about the bear suits and the string and the Minotaur and now the others. What about these, well, and houses repeat, but the melting ice cream cones and which is so playful, but also kind of scary as a giant thing melting on the house.
So one of my favorite art pieces is The Fall of Icarus by Bruegel the Elder. In that piece, like it's this pastoral scene where when was Bruegel around? I think he was Renaissance, so 13 to 1400s maybe. But I'm gonna fail my art history exam on this, I'm certain. But He's one of, yeah, I love his work. Anytime that I see it or looking for inspiration, I can just go and look at what he's done and just feel totally inspired. But the fall of Icarus, right? Talking about a Greek myth again, but in this image, there's a cow plow and a guy like plowing a field with a bull, right? Or with the, and there are all these other sort of like hills and people running around and walk and sort of entering these spaces. There's a boat sort of moving off, and then there's like this tiny little spot of like Icarus like falling in, or sorry, falling in the water, like with feathers around him and his feet are sticking out, right, as he sort of humorously drowns. And there's something really amazing about that image, that like the real focal point by the title is Icarus, but within a few yards is just somebody going about their regular business of sort of plowing a field and living a lifestyle away from any kings or any like large state sort of control, or the big tragedy of, you know, the son whose dad was a genius and made him these wings, you know, and didn't warn him like, hey, you know, like up high there's a sun that'll melt you and down low there's sea monsters that'll eat you. Do you know what I mean? Like he maybe could have talked to his son a little bit more about like those dangers. But within here, I like the idea of life just sort of being able to exist next to each other with its large tragedies and its like big emotions, right next to something else that's sort of unnoticed and unseen. And whether that not that's sort of a metaphor for climate change and things like that, sometimes I think it is, I feel like it is, and other times I think like I just want there to be a large sort of like weird, I want there to be something else going on that seems really obvious that everybody else is just sort of ignoring. Because I think that that seems like really like a big part of like the piece with talking about the I will take it all with me, that having those ice cream scoops there melting gives the opportunity for like this sort of like tragedy and this like slow this very slow and I what could be potentially like painful and dramatic and awful things sort of occurring around these characters where they don't really seem to care or notice. I also think like I think it's really fun in the same way that Michael was talking about his work, that how can you have an ice cream scoop be anything but thrilling or happy or sort of welcomed? And to give an emotion to an ice cream scoop too is just not going to be taken seriously. So even though it has this ability to be sort of big, dramatic, and tragic, I don't think it could ever be felt that way. And having the ability to do both those things is sort of thrilling. Like, here's an ice cream scoop, and like, oh, hey, you know, food. I eat that all the time. I can't have feelings for it. You know what I mean? And like suddenly imbuing it with these like human characteristics, I think leads to, it just feels funny and off-putting, but it also being totally ignored by the characters around it just makes it feel that much stranger. And I don't know. I don't know if it's like funny or hurtful or what, but I think it could be all of it. And that's just it, is that I feel like I'm trying to describe and work through all of the expressions and human emotions that are offered to me. And this is one way that I get to try and describe that.
Oh, geez, the screen prints. I absolutely love that you brought two editions of the, you know, edition of each of these prints. First, share your motive for bringing a whole edition of the works, and then a little bit about the imagery. Although I think the question might have been answered in the last statement a bit, but anyway.
Well, I mean, I'm a printmaker, and I teach printmaking, but I also love to make these things. And something that's really thrilling about printmaking is that like I get to make a ton of them and be able to share them. And that was sort of my intention with making these two editions. I knew we had a lot of wall work and I knew that we were going to be taking up those walls, and that we maybe didn't have a lot that was going to be happening outside of that space. So I got excited with the idea, like, oh, well, what if I were just to make an addition that somebody could easily just come up and take home with them? There's something really thrilling about the idea of anybody being able to come into the gallery and for a very low sort of price point, be able to take something with them. That really fits in with my sort of like values. I know that like I've got expensive paintings on the wall, but I'd much rather just like be able to have my work enter into like anybody's space. There's something like really thrilling about like how far this things that get made can travel, and prints have that ability. So I was excited to make these prints, thinking about that, thinking about having these sort of large scale things occurring around others, and having these sort of like home bases, these places of safety that we sort of retreat and keep safe and move into, along with kind of the confusion of like, what do we do around them, and how do we interact with them, and what do we do as people? And of course the ice cream scoops as well. I think that cherry on top, like, I think like it makes it funny that like it seems like that cherry's like sort of, is it hurting that scoop on the top? I don't know, it doesn't like it, but it sort of undermines the tragedy of it, or it makes it that much more tragic at the same time. And I think there's something really thrilling about that. Having these people coming around in the water that sort of flooded this like deluge where, we're piecing things together. And I think it seems a lot that like the withdrawal that's occurred within the pandemic of like, okay, we need to be like withdrawing to our spaces and sort of leaving these sort of larger things to take care of stuff, and sort of watching out our windows of like what's occurring in the world around us and seeing these sort of bizarre, I think that like being able to witness nature and how it's going and what's happening has been a big part of what it's like living through this pandemic. So in that way, I think of the birds houses as just being able to be playful with scale and I guess expectations maybe.
Yeah. Oh, I love these, and I do love the idea because so often if someone were to purchase something in the gallery, they can't take it home. They have to wait until the show's over. And this has been one of those rare occasions where we've been able to sell a few of the prints, and it's immediate gratification. They have this thing to take home with them, and
Yeah.
they're so cool.
Well, and I mean, I love anytime that I go somewhere and it's like, here, you can take this. I haven't been having this free samples at Costco, but I mean, why else would you go there, right? You just like, I bring my own. I used to just bring my own toothpick, but but I think we can offer that too. Like, I like the idea of anybody being able to come in and like, oh, I like that. Can I take that? And I mean, I think they're large editions. I think I printed around 60 of both of them. And I took a lot of time to draw and print and do all of that stuff. But I think mostly the purpose of them for me was to like think like, oh, I'd like for them to go home with people. I want them to like have a life out there. There's something very thrilling about that. And I think all artists are sort of wanting to experience that, of like having a bit of them like go out there into the world and have a life of its own. And maybe somebody else, I mean, the bathroom, I would say, is probably the best place that any artist can ever be shown, because it'll probably be looked at some point and studied. I guess maybe not with smartphones around anymore. I think that like now it may be ignored, but and being able to contemplate those relationships and that we have, that we've been able to build with the world around us.
Yeah, I love that. So I just have sort of a broad question, if you guys still have energy. It was just, I'm just interested in like major influences, whether, I mean, we talked a little bit about how you came to art, but if there's anything now that is, positive on your work. Clearly pandemic has been affecting a lot of people's work, though. Well, I've heard mixed things. Some, as it wears on, people are having a hard time generating more and keep going. But then there's other people, at least in the beginning during the shutdown, they were able to put the anxiety aside and harness that extra time to work. So I don't know. I'm just kind of curious of how you all are doing, or if there's like artists looking at anything you want to say. just talk.
I find that this pandemic has been what it has meant to me, other than getting pregnant and figuring out what that means in that environment. It also is a reminder to me that being flexible and adapting is really important. And so to me, I'm working on, these large drawings, but I've also known I don't have 3 hours to spend in the studio. I have 5 minutes. And what do I do with that 5 minutes? And the pandemic to me is now transitioning from drawings or paintings that take a year to make. And now I'm so invested in like small scale drawings, like, and how do I make these 5-minute drawings where I'm engaged in this process? And so of studying something. So I'm really interested in words right now. So I learned this word, ultra crepidarian, which is this idea, or I guess, where you're expressing an opinion outside of your expertise or knowledge, which seems to be social media like on steroids. And so I like this idea of uncovering words, and they invite me for a 5-minute drawing that I don't have the time right now to spend in the studio as I would in the past, or not with, a 1-year-old. So yeah, to me, the pandemic has taught me in my own studio practice that I need to be able to adapt. And so whatever that looks like, to be open to that and not be so rigid in how it is that I create information, or what it is my expectations going into a studio experience. Sorry, that was a long answer.
No, that was great. Thank you.
Great. Yeah, better than mine. I just wallow in uncertainty.
Doesn't that seem like a good description?
That's it. I don't know.
Michael, doesn't that seem like a good description of your work?
Yeah, well, yes, it is. But
like, just
yeah,
like
now
wallowing
more
and
wallowing now, more uncertainty.
But I feel like that's always been a part of your work. When you were talking about yours and walking through it, I was seeing your work as describing like the similar things to what I'm wanting to do, which is, or what I like doing, which is that like statements and counter statements, that none of those feelings are solid to some extent, and if they get too solid, that they have to be like softened up. And I think that there's a real contrast, I think, between maybe about how we talked about our work and the way that Jillian talks about her work, right? I feel like those feelings are so solid for you, and are so sort of like malleable or like fluid, right? Or gas. Maybe that's just it. Maybe I can be the liquid feelings, and Michael, you'll just be totally the gas feelings where. Yeah.
Yeah, I swim in a sea of self-doubt. But I have like one thing though that I have started to become really quite keen on, which I do think it's weird, because I was talking to some students about like their visual history, like what is it, like what are these things that you've always enjoyed? What are these things that sort of influence you, and it was sort of interesting. I had this like strange epiphany, that like I have all of these weird tormented scenes, and then I started thinking, like artists like Mark Riddick, who is a very well-known illustrator for like, death metal bands and stuff like that. So he draws all these cartoony, morbid, ridiculous things. And it's all of a sudden, like, I'm obsessed. Like I've like spent the last so many months just researching like creepy, well, not creepy guy. They're actually like, you read their interviews and they're actually these very thoughtful people, but then they make a living drawing like skulls vomiting out demon babies, and you're just like, and there's some part of me that's like, okay, I don't know what I'm gonna do, but I'm gonna spend my time looking at this with some hope that it makes sense to me, because I think it's like the counterpoint to the clip art cupids. It's like, I think I found some answer there. Like, I have my clip art, and then I have my like cheesy death metal artist or something. There's some yin and yang thing happening in my mind. So, but that's about as deep as I am right now. So otherwise I'm just trying to survive, getting thrown into remote instruction for the first 2 weeks of the semester and scrambling to figure out how to teach life drawing without a model.
Oh, wow.
So, but anyway, I don't know if that answers the question, but
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, I think that for me, I put a lot of time in my pieces, but I don't think that I put quite as much time in as you guys do. I mean, mine represent maybe like tens of hours, and where you guys are probably closer more to the hundreds, right? Before, or 100 hours for yours.
I could relate to Jillian saying that sometimes things take a year. I could feel that, because sometimes it has, where I've started something and then it's just like life takes over. I start doing different things and then I have to come back to it,
Or you have a baby, Michael, and you're like, pause on this.
Takes a lot of time. But I just mean that push to like, this investment into complexity, or just like how you had to go back in and add the little one. You sort of have, this long time that you spend with a piece, and it's actually the complexity of it sort of starts compounding on itself, because all of a sudden you realize, like, oh, there's all these new things I'm seeing in there, and now I want to put those in too, because, well, I've already spent 6 months on it, why not another month, and then you just kind of keep tweaking it. And before, when I didn't have all that weirdness happening in the drawings, I could confidently say, oh, I'll make a drawing in like 2 weeks. And now the thought of making a drawing in 2 weeks is sort of so laughable. I can't even imagine the me that used to be like, sure, give me 2 weeks.
I had this almost like an annoyance, like anytime I would go to an opening and someone would ask me, it was almost without fail, someone would ask me, how long did it take you to make that whatever it was, the underwear drawing or whatever, how long? And I kept thinking, why it's embarrassing that this takes me this amount of time to draw something, but I also could never accurately answer, like, this has taken me 39 years to figure out how to draw. That is the honest answer. I don't know, maybe 2 months, maybe 4 months, but I was so fascinated because Brian was saying this maybe doesn't take me as long as Michael or I find that to be really fascinating. Brian, do you think that there's less value in that, or like, how do you, like, what is that sentence to you?
I guess I see it as that means that my pieces have that mobility, the agility to be able to like be kind of a clunky drawing of a house and a person in a bear suit. Like, I'm not nailing that, and I'm not getting it quite to the level of perfection that you guys are. But I also like, I feel like that's because I spend that time on it, and then I move to the next thing. So in that way, like, the pandemic has been able to like, oh, well, you know what, like, we're talking about that now, and I'm making this body of work, and then it's like, you know what, like, I put that to one side, and it's like, I'm gonna make some prints, I'm gonna put that to one side, and I'm gonna make some paintings, right? So I get to sort of switch off, because I only spend tens of hours, or like, I think about 20 or 30 hours on each piece, maybe. I don't know. I haven't really added it up either. But to know that, I know that those prints, I think it took me about an hour to draw it, and then an hour to print each color, and then an hour to edition it, because I made the mistake of titling one with a big title. So it was like, yeah, you have to stop to smell the roses. I had to write that 5 times. And it was like, you should have just titled this one Roses. Like, what was wrong with it? What was
You fool.
And that's why the other one's like, the birds' houses was the second one. And it's like, that one's titled Birds, houses. Like, we can do that. We can do that 65 times. But printmaking is easy to find the math for, like how much time it takes. But I also, I love the ability that I like, oh, well, now that I've done that, I can try something else. And I think that means that my failures can happen more often. That like, oh, that one didn't work out. Well, that's all right. We only lost a couple of weeks working on it. Right. Okay. We move on to the next one. I can't imagine, like, I think like you guys like can't fail. You know what I mean? Like working on something for a year, there's like no way that thing could like not turn out okay.
I got a shelf of them.
Okay. I got some walls in my house that are totally prepared to handle those failures. They'll house them.
I'm curious something, I know this is not an open discussion, but since you guys are here and this is just like a rare opportunity, how are you, Brian and Michael? Because I feel like I'm struggling with understanding or like just reconciling beauty in my work, like how it's just like an octane levels of like, when am I using beauty? When am I acknowledging it? And when is it like, oh, that's just a default setting and that's naturally what I want it to look like? Like how do you, because both of your work is so attractive. And I'm just wondering, like, if you can speak about beauty in a way that would maybe help me understand selfishly.
You know, for me, that's a strange question. I do think about aesthetics and like, does it look good? And it really leaves me to sort of like gut feelings. I was really like, I was so happy with that safety is my first priority piece, or our first priority piece, that I'm like, I'm making another one. And like, I spent weeks on like making another one, and it just kept looking worse and worse and worse and worse. And then it was like, I just got to scrap this. And like, what was wrong with it? Oh, it's this color. Okay, I'm going to paint over that color. Like, nope, that didn't fix it. And then trying all of these different things. And eventually, like, I gave up. Right. So, I mean, it's there, but I feel like for me, I always just chase the concept and the content. Like, does it have that sense of like, does it have the push and pull between these two things? Like, whenever I have that statement there, do we get a sense of counter statement with it? And like, okay, does it follow this sense of aesthetics? Like, does it look all right? Does it have some nice like intimate moments of like me like trying to describe something? Like, okay, then we're doing all right. But you're right, I don't know, but sometimes something will be ruined and I won't know why.
Yeah, I mean, I would say what Brian just said in terms of intimacy, I think is the key to me in terms of what beauty is. I think beauty resides in this idea that I mean, because like Ivan Albright, I love Ivan Albright paintings, and they're hideous in a way, but they're beautifully hideous. You know, there's something so intimate and inviting about them. So I think, you know, how we define beauty is really slippery. You know, I think everything's sort of beautiful, really, in its context. You know, depending on how you're looking at something. And I mean, I tend to want things to have an accessibility. Like beauty is almost like a foil, maybe, like in that manifests maybe in sort of a refinement, like an idea of refinement that I have. Like I try to make it have a lushness or a richness that, you know, operates on this level of being inviting, you know. So I think that idea of the work inviting us is where beauty exists, because we you know, we're naturally attracted, you know, to the things that invite us to be attracted to them, you know. So there's like, you know, I don't know, just like everyone automatically defaults, you know. Like I remember as a child just thinking my mother was the most beautiful woman in the world, in a way, you know. It was just sort of defaulted in my brain, like the intimacy, this person was just beautiful, this is beauty to me, you know. So I don't know, there's that intimacy thing is a big part of it, I think, if that makes sense.
It does. I pose the question because often I feel like beauty is this like terrible word in the art world. Like, it can't be, if it's beautiful, it's void of meaning or whatever. And yeah, I guess I relate to that intimacy with beauty, and it's nice to get, you know, that confirmation that others are viewing it that way. I do find that I try and weaponize it a little bit, and like how can I use beauty against against what it is that I'm trying to draw or trying to relate to. So I was, yeah.
Well,
I'm
you're
aware.
terrifying me. You're terrifying me because if saying beauty means that you're criticizing someone, holy crap, I criticize everyone because I'm like, oh man, your work is beautiful, you know, or oh, your smile's beautiful. You're beautiful. So if that's like a derivative, like code for you suck, I'm in a lot of trouble.
It does, Michael. It does.
I'm in a lot
I'm
of trouble.
joking.
No wonder
No.
I'm not invited to the party anymore, you know? Another thing for me to be self-conscious about now, Jillian.
That's not what I meant. I'm sorry.
Well, I'm just teasing. It's a good question. It's a complicated thing. I agree.
I think you're talking about weaponizing that beauty. I think speaks to the sort of play that's going on in all of our work at the exhibition, and that's that the idea that like that you're trying to use this thing to like as a way to get to something else. Talking about using beauty to draw people in to think about this like underwear and the sort of like shock and surprise of that moment. I think is really nice and exciting. And one of my favorite moments of like looking at your work is that sort of like surprising shock and I think the feelings of confusion, like, oh well, like this is underwear, right? This is something that like just about everybody wears, I hope, right? And you know, but you know, just about everybody wears this, right? So it's really not that special. And you're right, and like all those thoughts about like, is it something to be seen? Well, why is it so brightly colored? Right? Or is it something to be ignored? Well, why is it so brightly colored? And we're arranging it into these like beautiful sort of like floral patterns. Like why does it also have sort of a sense of like, I don't know, danger, repulsion, like staying away, like, do you know what I mean? Like or not, or it's so intimate that it feels like you don't belong there.
Mhm.
Right?
Yeah, I've had people not want to see the work in that way. So I find that really interesting because it feels so familiar to me. I know what it is that I'm looking at. And I often find that maybe, oh, I shouldn't be viewing this to be an interesting observation.
Right. Well, it's sort of like watching two attractive people in a movie make out is like, we're totally cool with that. Like, I'm gonna watch that, but like like being around your friends that you like a lot and them like making out near you, you'd be like, you know, no matter how attractive your friends are, do you know what I mean? You're not just gonna like sit back and like,
How did we get
right?
here?
And a part of it is because we know it's fake in the movies, right? We know that there's like a falseness there. And whenever we're in the same room with that reality, I mean, if you were watching a play and two people were making out, you wouldn't be like, oh, let me give them their privacy. But if you had friends over, right, and then they shared an intimate moment like that, it'd be like, oh, you know what? I'm just going to kind of stare over at this plant for a moment and give you guys like, so you don't feel weird about it. And I think that what's nice about it is that I think that those drawings of yours like have that sense of like, oh, here I am, and like, oh, should I be looking at, am I here? I don't belong here. What am I doing here? And that's sort of a really wonderful experience.
Oh, thank you for saying that, Brian. That was really nice for you to say that. I do like this word intimacy. I feel like it's you know, going back to the title of Small Talk and then that pivot toward intimacy and real exchange. It seems to be echoing through all of the work in one way or another.
Actually, it made me think about something there also with like, it's no problem to be in a life drawing class and to be drawing from a nude model and it doesn't seem like anything, you know, that's just part of what you do. But to have the model come in and maybe drop their robe right there on the platform beforehand, there in that moment, oh wait, that's a real person. That's not just, you know, that there is that tension and intimacy that can come across also in the underwear drawings. Yeah.
That just about everyone wears.
Yes.
Just about everyone. Just about. Thank you, Brian. Just about everyone.
Yeah, oh, well, thank you so much. I mean, this has been absolutely wonderful. I've really enjoyed talking to all of you, sort of as we went through, and then especially here all together. And you know, one, having your work here that we're able to share with the people in Flint and those who actually experience our shows online or through this, you know, this now like archive event that we will have on YouTube is going to be really fantastic. But also I get to live with your work for a month. So thank you for that loan of time. And something else that I was really thinking about as we went through and sort of contemplating further the title after, you know, Brian was kind of talking about that. The one thing I feel this bodies of work are not superficial small talk at all. I mean, I love how it like comes together as like the title was the entrance. That was the how's the weather as you walk in the door. But then as you actually like walk through and move and experience the works, it's the deeper conversation, I think. At least that's my take on it. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wow, that was really great. I so appreciated the conversation. Jillian, Michael, and Brian really, you know, opened up and shared some of their thoughts, their, you know, the ups and downs of what we've all been going through. It was, I mean, I really thought that was a great conversation. I hope you enjoyed it too. Thank you again so much to the artists and to you, our viewers. We appreciate you.